Our reading today is likely a familiar one from the Reverend Rebecca Ann Parker. It is entitled, "Choose to Bless the World." I have edited it only for our time together. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. You must answer this question. What will you do with your gifts? Choose to bless the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intentions to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil, there moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and for this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude, to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. There has long been a debate in religious circles, and that certainly includes Unitarian Universalist circles, about the degree to which politics should be spoken of from the pulpit. It is true that a congregation like ours should both challenge and comfort people from all walks of life. That we should welcome you, as we did the flowers today, just as you are. And I believe that it is counter to our values as a faith if we become too comfortable being surrounded by like-minded people. In addition, I have said this before, I think it is an abuse of my role to directly advocate for or against certain politicians or political parties from the pulpit. But I would not agree that one can be an effective preacher and teacher of any theological message while still believing that you can truly separate the two. As I've said before, religion is inherently political. Our flower ceremony, or flower communion, as it is often called, is the quintessential example of this. Despite what the jovial decorations of our sanctuary may suggest, this service is more than a jaunty, light-hearted celebration of flowers as a metaphor for diversity and community. The true meaning and history of our flower ceremony can break your heart wide open if you let it. Because this is a service born from the countercultural theological belief that diversity is beautiful and ought to be celebrated. A belief that the gifts that we give and the gifts that we receive from our spiritual communities are, like our vases here clearly show, more wonderful, more delightful, more delicious when they are varied. That we are made better people, made a better faith by testing the validity of our beliefs against those of another. And flower ceremony is all of that. And it is also a service commemorated annually by telling the story of one of our faith's martyrs, the Reverend Dr. Norbert Chopik, who died at the hands of a government who made his fervent political belief in the inherent worthiness of all a political crime worthy of death. I know I'm not the only one whose heart is heavy following last week's decision by our state's legislature, who chose to disempower Black communities Black voters and Black political leadership in our state by gerrymandering our districts beyond all recognition. I say I am disappointed as your minister, however, because justice, equity, pluralism, interdependence, diversity, these are central to our faith. And they are the opposite of what we saw play out this week. We saw injustice, we saw corruption, we saw greed, we saw demagoguery, racism, inequity, even schadenfreude from those in power. We saw a push to oppress anyone who dissented against homogeny. You are entitled to disagree with me, but prophetic leadership in a time of political upheaval and intentional distribution of misinformation requires naming reality using honest and even blunt language. This is one of the most important lessons religious institutions learned in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Too many clergy in Europe raised the Nazi flag from their pulpit, advocating for one particular political party. Too many spiritual leaders supported Hitler's message using religious language from theology twisted to appease a madman with more power than any one human should have. Too many sat by idly and allowed an atrocity to happen because it was easier to look away than to have their humanity stirred into action, because action meant risk. Thus, the message of the flower ceremony and of Reverend Chapek's bold commitment to provide honest updates of the war through the lens of what was then our Unitarian theology will always be relevant, whether it's 2026, 1942, 3042. I want to take us into a place of remembering. Let us remember together the depth of this history. The flower ceremony originated in 1923 by the Reverend Dr. Norbert Čapek of the modern Unitarian movement in Czechoslovakia. Dr. Čapek, then a Baptist, met the Czech-born Maya, his future wife, in New York City while he was studying for his PhD. And to quote from a biography on him, while in the United States, Čapek suffered 2 heresy trials at the accusation of Slavic Baptist ministers in attempts to expel him from the Baptist Association because, you see, he'd been pursuing an increasingly more liberal religious perspective, which unnerved them, and ultimately led Norbert to resign as a Baptist minister in 1919. It was at his wife's urging that Norbert then turned to Unitarianism, which better fit his more radical ideas. The Čapeks returned to Czechoslovakia in 1921 and established the dynamic liberal church in Prague called the Liberal Religious Fellowship. Again, we're great with names, y'all. Dr. Čapek introduced this special service at his church on June 4th, 1923, because as his biography continues, for some time, he himself had felt the need for some symbolic ritual that would bind people more closely together. The format had to be one that would not alienate any who had forsaken other religious traditions. The traditional Christian communion served with bread and wine was unacceptable to the members of his congregation because of their strong reaction against the Catholic faith. That's why you might hear the difference between flower ceremony and flower communion. So we turned to the native beauty of their land, the countryside, for elements of a communion-type service, which would be genuine to them. And this simple service was the result. It was such a success that it was held yearly just before the summer recess of the church. On the last Sunday before the summer, all the children and adults participated in this colorful ritual, which gives concrete expression to the humanity-affirming principles of our liberal faith. Now, the flower ceremony was brought to the United States in 1940 and introduced to the members of Cambridge, Massachusetts church by Reverend Čapek's wife, Maya, who was herself ordained in 1926. It was during her tour of the United States that Maya introduced the flower ceremony, and afterwards, it spread like wildfire to Unitarian and eventually Unitarian Universalist churches across the US and now the world. As we probably know, Dr. Čapek's story does not end there, however. He served his congregation of over 3,000 people in Prague for many years, and in 1938, as the Nazis pressed upon the country, he preached from his pulpit, quote, "We Czechs are becoming the backbone of the history of humanity. We are today the only nation in the whole of Europe that is ready to resist oppression. Confronting our descendants, we will never have to feel ashamed of the fact that as a small nation in the middle of Europe, we were ready to defend human dignity, freedom, and justice from violence, lies, and lawlessness." My gosh, this sounds familiar. You see, such boldness has always been our spiritual inheritance as Unitarian Universalists. When the Nazis took control of Prague the very next year, the American Unitarian Association sent the Reverend Čapek a special invitation back to the US with a ministry position that would provide both a stipend and safety. Norbert immediately declined it, writing that he could not leave his people, no matter the suffering that awaited them. Maya, however, returned with his support to the United States and shared that the Flower Communion was being celebrated across the country, now as a mystical embrace of dignity, beauty, and freedom in the very shadow of death. Because Reverend Norbert's congregation continued to grow, eventually blooming to 6 missions across the country, the Gestapo began to grow suspicious. They determined that Reverend Čapek's gospel of the inherent worth and beauty of every person was, as Nazi court records show, too dangerous to the Reich for him to be allowed to live. They arrested Čapek and his adult daughter Zora for the crime of listening to foreign broadcasts he shared with his congregation so as to provide accurate information which could potentially keep them safe and empower them to act as a part of the resistance. A year later, he was sent to Dachau, where legend has it he held his final flower ceremony, inviting other prisoners to find a bit of greenery. No vase this time, to honor their hope for freedom, their sustained humanity, and their ability to still see beauty in the midst of even the most horrendous conditions. This gentle soul suffered a cruel death, but his message of hope, of beauty in diversity, of decency, of resistance lives on through this flower ceremony, and therefore through each of us who participate in it. It is terrifying to know that those of us who believe as Reverend Čapek did and who seek to make real the promises of this faith of ours, that we could easily be found in dire circumstances, whisked away, deported to some foreign land by our very own government, detained for an indeterminate period of time with no rights and no record of where we're being held. It is in these moments that we must ask ourselves, as Reverend Čapek did, what it is we are willing to sacrifice, as one of our more fervent hymns says, for that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. It is also in these moments that we realize that as UUs, we have trained for times like this by listening to the story of Reverend Čapek every single year. When we hear his passion for justice and equity, when we hear his refusal to seek safety when courageous leadership was needed, it reminds us not to look away, but rather to bear witness to each new offense against our religious values. May we find meaning and inspiration in hearing the words he left for his daughter, a final poem scribbled in a letter and handed to her after his sentencing. It is worthwhile to live and fight courageously for sacred ideals. Oh, blow ye evil winds into my body's fire, my soul you'll never unravel. Even though disappointed 1,000 times or fallen in the fight and everything would worthless seem, I have lived amidst eternity. Be grateful, my soul, my life was worth living. He who was pressed from all sides but remained victorious in spirit is welcomed into the choir of heroes. He who overcame the fetters giving wing to the mind is entering into the golden age of the victorious. End quote. I get emotional each time I hear these words because as he wrote them, he knew he would very likely die. And yet he proclaimed he would do it all again. I say these words to myself, as you know, I tattooed them on my body so that in moments like now that require great moral conviction, moments where my legs may be shaking, my soul is weary, my voice wavers, I can remember what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist who has the great privilege and the awesome responsibility to stand upon the shoulders of normal, everyday people who through great personal sacrifice now live amidst eternity with a choir of heroes. Dear ones, never doubt the seriousness of our faith. The profound values we are called to make real in this world. May you too find the courage of your conviction in these words and in the story of Reverend Chopik and his flower ceremony. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.